So the topic is, I think, a very interesting one. The emergent church movement and lessons we can learn for mission. I would like to say that I'm not here, the purpose is not really to thoroughly destroy the movement. My purpose is to look what they are doing and learn some lessons. What can we do, or what we should do? And so I would like to start with a quote from Steve Mansfield. You know, Steve Mansfield is a journalist who is interested in the life of the US presidents. He has written biographies of a number of presidents, of Clinton, and now he published about Trump. But also he is much interested in church life and the relationship between churches and the power. But he made a very interesting statement, observation. He said, people are voting with their feet, meaning church members. And he has looked in many denominations, especially in the first world, that they're becoming more empty and empty. This is very sad, actually, in Europe, because in Europe you have such a beautiful cathedrals. And when you go there on Sunday, you will find very often in a corner, you know, a priest really providing a service, and the chapels or the big cathedrals are only filled when there is a good organ concert. And you ask yourself, is this the future of Christianity? You know, even in our own church, when you travel in places like here in Europe, we have these beautiful campuses, like Newbold here, or Friedensau in Germany, Cologne in France, and other places, but we don't have students. And you ask yourself, what should we do? Should we just continue as we have done always? Or we have to do something to fill them? And, you know, I don't have the answer. I don't claim I have the answer. But I ask myself, you know, maybe we have chosen a wrong goal because we have built these places to serve ourselves. And we have not built them as places to attract young people from the society and use them as, you know, witnessing places. And for example, in a number of universities that are really prospering, even in Africa, you have more than half of the students are non-believers. In some places to 80%, you know, we have people that study in our universities. And it's a great opportunity. Why not? And why not to develop in Europe maybe degrees that would be really, really answering the needs of the society? And to well, I have to go to my topic otherwise. But this is something we have to think, because we have originally thought only about ourselves. But why not using them as a missionary tool, you know, educating young people? But Steve Mansfield said people are voting, and what he continues, and he says the next generation is not going to church. For the most part, they are going to the first church of Starbucks. And maybe we have to learn from Starbucks something. Why not? You know, what strikes me a lot is when you study the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, the major assignment is to be witnesses. But then the emphasis is that in order to witness, you can do it not only through your life, but you have to fill the world with the word. And then, actually, after the Pentecost, you have the first thing, you have a sermon. A word is preached. And throughout the book, there is an invitation to proclaim. But the invitation to proclaim the word is used, actually Luke is using many different verbs to describe the process of proclamation. In fact, he uses 45 different verbs to describe the way you proclaim, which tells you that Luke was sending a message. Guys, be creative. There is not only one way how to fill the world with a word. And he uses 45 different verbs. Sometimes he says preach. Sometimes he says put the word into the ears. Sometimes he says argue. Sometimes he says, get in conversation. All kinds of verbs. 45 different verbs, which is for me a strongest argument that to be creative has a biblical foundation. And if we are not going to be creative, then what will happen is that our churches will be empty. And so maybe we have to learn something even from Starbucks. What they are doing there, the young people. It's not coffee that attracts them. They sit there, everyone with the iPhone. Have you observed how the young people visit Starbucks? They sit together, but they don't talk. They speak through the social media. It's very interesting. Well, the emerging church. The philosophical foundation of the emerging church is the following one. Since culture changes, as a response, a new church should emerge. What would you say to it? I think you agree that the culture changes, right? I mean, all of us agree. The culture changes. But the emerging church says, since culture changes, a new church should emerge. Well, we could argue on the second part, how far and so on, but the very foundational presupposition, so to speak, is actually not a bad one. Since culture changes, in order to be relevant to the new culture, you have to do something. If you continue the same way you have been doing things always, you will lose the generation that you live in. So something needs to be done. Of course, we can criticize how far they went, but we have to really be careful and think what needs to change so that our message can be relevant to the modern times. Well, there are different approaches to culture, and let's just briefly look at them. There are at least in the literature you can find 4 different approaches to culture. Approach number 1, it's called the theology of restoration, or Christ against culture. These are the voices that say we have to restore everything that was in the beginning. Now, the big question is, what is the beginning? For every movement, it's a different phase. For the Adventists, you hear voices that say we have to go back to the pioneers. And Wagner, in his answering the question, referred to it. And actually, when you speak about the situation with the Trinity, one of the strongest arguments that those who are anti-Trinitarians, they use this argument. We have to go back to the pioneers. Well, if you want to go back to the pioneers, then you have to eat pork. Not only that, you have to chew tobacco while preaching. Some of the pioneer preachers were chewing tobacco while preaching. But when you chew, you have to spit then, right? So you can imagine, they had special places for that. So let's go back to the pioneers. So I think we have to really distinguish what do we mean. And so we can be against culture. We can say everything that is what surrounds us is against Christ, and Christ is against it. So let's go back. Well, Amishes are the best example of it. And yet they still are not very successful, because when they have stores, let's say not far from the GC, they have a store. And if they ride in their villages on special transportations to bring the food quickly, to sell more, they use the modern transportation. So it's very interesting. But this is one way. Christ against culture. And so you try to restore everything what was in the beginning. There are some positive elements, you know, because when you speak about the reformers, you speak about Martin Luther, this was also his goal, you know, to let's go back to the gospel, so to speak. There are some positive elements, but there are a lot of challenges, and it will not bring us really far. The second one is the theology of accommodation, Christ of culture. Here you feel that actually not only the culture is changing, and this is now a new trend in theology, by the way, that is resurrected from the end of last century, that God also changes. And a number of theologians today are really producing articles and saying and describing that God of yesterday is not God of today. So God changes. But it is connected with the way people interpret the text in our times, and a little bit later we will see it. But this is a way where you really accept the culture and you try to change your beliefs that would fit this culture. The third approach is the theology of correlation, Christ above culture. This is an approach where you try to bring in a dialogue Christ and culture, but you have the presupposition that Christ is above the culture. But you leave more or less the culture alone, because for you, Christ is above it, and so you just, although you are in a dialogue, you still make a strong emphasis. We have the message, I proclaim it, it's your problem if you accept it or not. The final one is a theology of confrontation. Christ transforming culture. This is when you try to confront the culture and try to change the culture. In many of them, these approaches, you can find positive moments and also negative moments. You know, Adventism, as Daniel has presented in his presentation, was born in the time that was called, or is called modernity. This is a time when there was a confidence in human reason, science, and logic. There was a primacy of reason. Real knowledge is knowledge of facts. The ethical norms in society were developed from Judeo-Christian morality. Now, our Adventist message, as the pioneers have really preached it, fitted very well in this context. You know, when you study or read the history, how Adventism came to many countries, how Adventism came to Russia, to Brazil, to Argentina, to many places, it was through tracts, you know, where arguments were presented, you know, where prophecies were explained. And people read it, they compared it with the history, and they accepted it. It was powerful. It fitted very well to this context. Now, today we live in the times, actually many will say already postmodernity, but we will come to it. What is the postmodernity? There is a time when there is no universal truth. Everything is subjective and relative. Even what counts as evidence and logic is value dependent. There is no objective means upon which to predicate morality. Morality is relative. But what is very interesting, and we often forget it, especially when we speak about hermeneutics, in postmodernity, language is fluid and arbitrary. The text has many meanings. You know, if in the past you trusted the text, and the aim of hermeneutic, or exegesis, was to understand the text, to understand what the author was meaning when he wrote this. But in postmodernity, the understanding of the text is very different. Here is one article from James Sire on being a fool for Christ and an idiot for nobody. Logocentricity and postmodernity. He wrote the following: the interpretation of a text depends on the relative viewpoint and the particular values of the interpreter. To understand a text on the basis of one's life relation to it is to have pre-understanding. And now this is very crucial. Interpretation does not depend on the external text, nor its author. Actually, a person that is minded in this time, in this culture, views the text differently, views the historical text differently. In modernity, you read the history, you compare it, and you believe it. The text says it. This is what happened. In postmodernity, no. Everything is subjective. It is your view of history. Now, concerning the text, and this affects our biblical interpretation, in modernity, we would really show you what the Hebrew meant, what it is meaning today, what the Greek meant, and what it is meaning today. You make, study, you show, and this is evident. It's enough. But in postmodernity, no. You can be the best knowledgeable, specialist in Hebrew and Greek, but it doesn't matter for me. You're only trying to say what the guy meant, but it's of no interest to me. The text means what it speaks to me. It might speak to you this, but for you something else, but this is what it speaks for me. So for our understanding, there are two different worlds. It is like in Jesus' time, there was a Hebrew way of thinking and Greek way of thinking. Two different kind of, cultures at the same time. The same is happening today. But the big problem is the following. There was a modernity, postmodernity. Now, what next? Now, what is next is best described, and some authors now are coming to it and describing it as multi-modernity. What it really means is the following. We are living in the 21st century, and we think chronologically about these times, modernity, postmodernity. But in reality, it does not happen this way. You have today, currently, people who live in modernity. In the first world, in the most developed countries, you have a significant percentage of people that live in modernity today. Not only the older generation, you have young people, very young people, who live and think in modernity. And you have at the same time, people are fully grounded in postmodernity. So you cannot say, this is the right way of preaching, for example. You have to be creative constantly because in your audience, you have always multi-modernity cultures. They are there. And this makes it so difficult. Now, when it comes to culture, in our reaction to culture, it makes it also difficult that sometimes people in one question follow the model number one in relationship to culture. But on the other items, the same person uses another approach to culture. So we are very selective. So you cannot say this guy takes culture like Christ against culture. Yes, in some questions we are against culture. In some times we accommodate the culture. In some items we try to transform culture. We are so different. And this makes it almost impossible, humanly speaking, to be successful. And so we have the option. Either we keep preaching Adventism as we have always done. It doesn't mean we will not have success, but we will reach only the group that thinks in the way people thought in modernity, or still thinking, who are living in this. Now, what is also interesting, the same person who, let's say, in question of religion lives in modernity, in other questions can live in postmodernity. It is so divided, so complex, so that a number of scholars suggest we should speak now about multi-modernity. So you have both. You have like a soup. And what to do, how to do it. This is why, for example, we have even in Adventists young people who are very, very oriented to move back to the pioneers. Even young people. Because they, although they live, let's say, chronologically in the times of postmodernity, they hold being in most of the issues, especially the religious one, are in modernity. Now let's see a little bit how the emerging church has tried to answer these challenges. the emergent church movement falls into line with basic postmodernist thinking. It is about experience over reason, subjectivity over objectivity, spirituality over religion, images over words, feelings over truth. Now, this is very interesting, images over words. You know, the foot washing in modernity was rejected by many. But now, for people who live in postmodernity, this is something very special. And we can do something big out of it because they like, you know, images so much. So I think we have to be here very creative and think what to do. For example, in many, many places, young people especially, when they come to the church, and some churches have the tradition, you know, if you have a prayer request, you can come either up front or you can write a note, you know, and then they have a special prayer for that. This is very attractive for many people in the postmodernity. So we have to really think here what we can do and so on. Now, the emerging churches are very fluid, they are very hard to define, and they are very varied. Because it's not a unified organization. Every church is almost something, totally original. It is the most controversial and misunderstood movement in the church today. Scott McKnight, who is one of the representatives of the emerging church movement, has written. Now, we sometimes use the word emerging church and sometimes emergent church. There is a difference. Emerging church, this is a global movement of attempt to reshape of how we do church to fit the postmodern culture. But inside of this movement, there is another movement which is called the Emergent Church. It's actually an organization of the Emergent Church movement, which is called in many places Emergent Village. And here you have some names of those who are pioneering or supporting this. But lately, the Emergent Church movement as a village, Emergent Village, is really kind of losing the attractiveness or the influence. And now in the evangelical circles, what you will find is that there is a lot of critique towards the emergent church. And evangelicals who are more conservative, they try to describe and put all the emerging churches that are more liberal in the camp of emergent churches. So you can find, when you read the expression emergent church, you have to really find out what the author means. He can mean the emergent village. It's in a special organization inside the emergent church movement. Or he means the left wing of the emergent movement. So it's a little bit confusing when you read it. But there is a lot of critique inside of the evangelical churches, and I will just bring you some examples here. If you go to Wikipedia, for example, they write, proponents believe the movement transcends the modernist labels of conservative and liberal, calling the movement a conversation. To emphasize its developing and decentralized nature, its vast range of standpoints, and its commitment to dialogue. Participants seek to live their faith in what they believe to be a postmodern society. What those involved in the conversation mostly agree on is their disillusionment with the organized and institutional church, and their support for the deconstruction of modern Christian worship, modern evangelism, and the nature of modern Christian community. Now, a couple more quotations of how evangelicals themselves critique the movement. The emergent church is the latest version of liberalism, Mark Driscoll says. The only difference is that the old liberalism accommodated modernity and the new liberalism accommodated postmodernity. Oh, this is very interesting. I was wondering how it was even published in Christianity Today in 2013. Top 3 adversaries of Christian conservatives: communism, Islam, and the emergent church. Christian conservatives who think Satan is using communism and Islam to bring down America can add a new adversary to the list, the Emergent Church Movement. So you see, there is a lot of critique inside of the evangelical church. But if you really want to understand the Emergent Church, one of the helpful articles is from someone who is really part of the Emergent Church. And he wrote an article in Christianity Today in January 2007, Scott McKnight. And he says, yes, it is true that the Emergent Church movement is so diverse. It's very difficult to describe. But he says the best way to describe it is to present it as a lake. And you have 5 small rivers or streams that are flowing into this lake. And these 5 streams he calls, number 1, prophetic or provocative. Number 2, postmodern, all start with P, as you see. Practice-oriented, new ecclesiology, post-evangelical, post-systematic theology, and political. I will not go into it. You can read it in the article, because you can find it in, if you have access to Logos, Logos has put all the Christianity Today issues there. I want to concentrate now on the main focuses of the emerging church and what lessons we can learn. So my attempt is not so much to really present the emerging church and critique it. My attempt is to look what they are doing and see if we can learn some lesson, not to bring it to the point they are bringing it, but maybe to give a new emphasis, but still learn from them, because they have an experience now for around 25, 30 years. They have experienced many things. Some have been successful, some have not. But let's see what kind of emphasis they do in their teachings, in their life, in how they do church. And so main focuses of the emerging church and lessons we can learn. Number 1, almost all of them emphasize Christ. Some go to the extremes and they separate the person Christ from the teachings of Christ. Some go to this extreme. Not all, but some do it. So our attempt is now not to evaluate what they have done right or wrong, but what can we learn from it. And so I would suggest, and I think it was suggested by Daniel also, I would suggest that if you go to the Bible, you will find strong biblical foundation that Christ is the only cornerstone that we have. Now, when you look at Adventism, we can be, very critical of our pioneers. But we have to recognize in what situation they worked. They were all Christians. They were Christians. And they just discovered the new light, the new truth. They discovered the soon second coming. They discovered the prophecies. They discovered the sanctuaries. They discovered, these, so to speak, pillars of Adventism. These were new. And naturally, being already in a Christian community, they emphasized it. But then the emphasis was so strong and so long that in 1888, there was a need of really bringing back the foundations of Christianity. If you take, it's like, you have a car, and you concentrate, let's say, on the wheels, and forget the engine. And suddenly you have a nice structure, but it's not moving. So it happened with Adventism. We were emphasizing, and this was right at the right time, on this uniqueness. But we forgot the foundation of Christianity. And so 1888 was a time of rethinking, and actually Ellen White was very in favor and supporting it. Now, it is very interesting that you go to the Acts of the Apostles. They very clearly present Christ as the only one way. The only one. There is no other name. Only Christ. And in the preaching, when you read all the New Testament sermons, you will see that they all point to Christ. All of them, without exception. And so I would suggest that what we really need to do in the Adventist church, we have to put Christ back to the place that he deserves. I mean, Christ should be the center of everything we are doing. Everything. Christ, the cornerstone. You know, I have learned this in a hard way. Allow me to tell you a story. I don't know, some of Europeans don't like stories. But in postmodern time, people like stories. You know, when in the Soviet Union, the church was, persecuted for 70 years, as you know. Sometimes more intensely than other times. There were times when all pastors were taken in prison in one night. And some of them never returned back. They difficult times. But the most difficult time was for the church to, keep alive, because there was no seminaries. We couldn't train our pastors. And so there was a dream to have a seminary. And finally, when Gorbachev came to power, they allowed us to build a seminary where Daniel was working as academic dean in the beginning. And so what happened was that as the church members found out that we got a permission to build a seminary, the invitation went throughout all of the countries and the churches of the Soviet Union to come and help build the seminary. 1,800 people came, not at the same time, at different times, using their vacation and working for free. By the way, if you visit Zaoksky today, the central building was built for free, and it is still strong and beautiful. Other buildings were built for money, and they are in need of renovation. Now, when Gorbachev gave the permission to build the seminary, there was one condition they told us. You have to find a place far away so that no one can find you. It must be hidden somewhere in the woods. So our people have presented 5 different options to the government. All of them were rejected. And finally, they gave a permission to rebuild a school that burned down and was used as a garbage place by all the villagers surrounding it, 103 kilometers southwest from Moscow, lost in the woods. And so this 1,800 people built this building, starting from the foundation, actually. When the building was finished, there was a notice in the news. Seventh-day Adventists turned a garbage place into paradise. Now, it attracted so many people. All the tourist agents have included Zaoksky in their list. Now, we had sometimes 13 big buses waiting in line to get a tour from all over. It was a big challenge for us teachers. You finish a class, and you never know if you will have a lunch or not. I remember one day, I was finishing my class, and I was already anticipating a good lunch. We agreed that I will come home, and Galina is a perfect cook, by the way. I think she will be invited even in heaven to cook. And I already, was thinking about the lunch as I was finishing the lesson. And I went out, already anticipating, the good food, and I see a new bus coming. The bus stopped, and they opened the door, and the leader of the group came out and said, "Young man, could you please give us a tour?" Now, before, if you would speak about Christ on the street, you would be put in prison. Now they are coming to you. How can you say no? So I said, of course, and I started to give them a tour. But as soon as I heard who were the people in the bus, I almost fell, losing the conscience. Because the leader of the group told me, said, "I have brought the professors of the Communist Party University." Actually, this was the only university that prepared people for the leadership in the Communist Party. Only people after they had already, graduate degrees were accepted there and prepared for leadership in the Communist Party and for the Kremlin. These were our ideological enemies. These were the ones. And now I had to give them a tour. And so I started to give them a tour, and I would bring them to one room, and I would say, look at the floor. Because every floor was a piece of art. You see, people would come from one part of the country, and they would be told, take this room and do whatever you can for the Lord. And now if you go, every room has a different layout, artistic layout of the floors, of the ceilings. And I would just go on and on describing them how the people, first I showed them the garbage place, then I showed them what the people of God have done, then I showed them the beautiful designs, and then I came to the wall and I said to them, but we need more space for our worship on Sabbath. But look what I will do now. And we had a solid wall, a real wall. Daniel knows it. It's not like American built from paper, and wood. It is, almost 1 meter or 80 centimeters brick, heavy wall. I said, look what I will do. I will push the button and the wall will go down and we will have a big auditorium for worship. And so I would come, I would push the button. They would go, wow. And I would be proudly continue. And you know what happened? Suddenly the leader of the group interrupts me and says, young man, thank you. It's enough about walls, about bricks, about layouts. Can you better tell us what Jesus means to you personally? Now, can you imagine an ordained minister is preaching about walls, bricks, stones, and a leader of a Communist Party university tells me, sir, it's enough. You better tell us what Jesus means to you personally. So I started to tell them about Jesus. After we finished the meeting, the chief or the leader of this group asked me, he said, can I have a private talk to you? So we went aside, and he looked me into the eyes and he said to me, young man, you are so lucky. You even don't imagine how lucky you are of having Jesus. He said, you see, you can always come to Jesus with your joys, with your sorrows. But to whom can I go, he said. Sometimes I think I will go to Kremlin and tell them, but what is the purpose? Because most of my challenges are coming from them. I cannot go to those who are under me because I'm just challenging through all the problems. I cannot even go to my wife. She is tired already listening to all of my problems. And he looked to me and said, and there is only one thing left for me. And what he said, I will never forget. It made me speechless. Because he was the leader of the Communist Party University. These guys had a paradise already on earth. They had, every year 4 weeks free vacation on the Black Sea. They had different stores. They had free apartments, free health. Everything was for them. And he tells me there is only one thing left for me, and this is to take my life. When I heard that, I was speechless. And I must confess to you, it was not me who broke the silence. It was him. He broke the silence and he said, or maybe I also can come to you, Jesus. This was a lesson for life. And I understood. We can tell all kinds of stories. We can, present beautiful buildings, walls, all kinds of things. But what the people really need is a person, a living person, Jesus Christ. And there is power in the name of Jesus. And I think we have to rethink everything we do, every sermon we preach, every article we write. Is Christ the center of it or not? If we lose the cornerstone, no one needs us. Even Christ does not need us. And so I think this is a very important lesson. Only Christ. The Emerging Church Movement does it. Many do it, maybe not right. But the emphasis is right. And we should learn it, accept, and rethink what always should be and actually was a foundation for the belief. Now, most of the emerging churches, not all, because they are so varied, some of them are still treasure some doctrines. But when you go to extremes, they are really against the systematic theology and the doctrines. And here I ask myself, is it not the time for us to rethink how we present the Adventist message? You know, there is only one way to attract people, only if we have an attractive message. An attractive message will be only then attractive if Christ will be the center of this message. And so my dream really is, and Dr. Denis Fartin is here, and he is working in the systematic theology department at Andrews Seminary. My dream is if the students, would write dissertations to present in a new way, Christocentrically, our doctrines. Present the Sabbath in such a way that Christ would be the center, that it would be attractive. Present the sanctuary, present everything we have. We have not done yet the work. We felt it has worked, our argumentation before, and it will work now. It will not work for the postmodern mind. We have to attract. You see, because they are selective. Only even if you present beautifully, you have to show, because they will ask, so what? It's beautiful, but what does it give me? We have to show what it means. This is why Dr. Davidson now is finishing a book about the sanctuary, dedicating, I think, 5 chapters to the question, so what? What does it give me today as a person living in the 21st century? What does it give me, this doctrine? I think we have to rethink, rewrite doctrine in such a way that Christ would be the center. We have not done this work yet. I was once flying from the Dominican Republic to Washington. And as I was sitting and I was flying with Galina, I suddenly heard behind me 2 people dialoguing. And there was one young person and a businessman. The young person introduced himself and said, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. So you can imagine, I pushed now my ear as far as possible between the chairs to see now how this young person will witness. And I must tell you, this young person changed all my understanding of missiology. All what the teachers taught me, he destroyed in this flight. I was listening, and I hear the guy, the businessman, asking the young fellow, what is the major difference between the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the Catholic Church? Oh, now I was so excited. But what I heard almost threw me out of the plane. You know what he said? He said the major difference between the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the Catholic Church is that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has a prophet, Ellen G. White. Well, in all my training in mission, I was always told, never start with pork. Never start with Sabbath. Never start with Ellen White. Start with what we have in common. So first I was very disappointed. But this guy put me to shame. Then he started to explain. And he started to share and saying about the beautiful character of God that is love, and how his image in the world was distorted. And so God called a lady with a special mission to present the beautiful character of Christ to the world. And he went on and on and on and on, so that at the end the guy wanted to get the desired wages. So when I left the plane, my missiology has changed. Now I say, if you want to start with pork, go ahead. If you want with Sabbath, go ahead. Ellen White, go ahead. Doesn't matter where you start, as long as you show the person as a cornerstone of this, what you start from. This is the key. And I think this is our assignment now, to find a way to present the doctrines in such a way that Christ would be uplifted, would be the center of it, and it would be beautiful, would be attractive, so that no one would... You know, sometimes we are so closed in our circles, but we have a message for the world. If we present the message beautiful, you know, BBC will interview us, CNN will interview us, but it needs to be presented in such a beautiful way so that they would come to us. But we have to think about it. We have to do it. It's a hard work, but it can be done. Now, in the Emerging Church Movement, you will find what they make a strong emphasis, not on the beliefs, but on the behavior. It is not what you believe, but how you treat your neighbor. I think Daniel referred to the situation in Rwanda. I mean, this was the worst time in Adventism, when hundreds of thousands of Adventists, with their lips testifying the message, but with their hands destroying each other. I mean, this was the worst witness we could give to the world. It is shameful even to think that it could be possible, but it was. And I think this is something we have to really work on. It is not only belief. What point of believing if it doesn't transform your heart, your life? Somehow we need to connect the believing and the behaving. Somehow we need to find ways to be a witness. There is no worse witness than a person who preaches Christ but really hates his neighbor. And actually we have raised a generation in this kind of a way. What is important is what you believe. It is important what you believe, but the belief must be expressed through your behavior. Actually, I think Jan Paulson was speaking about it very often when he spoke about the mission of the church. He always used the phrase, I will never forget. He said, if you live in this street, other people's life on the same street has improved or not? Do the people on the same street will be proud that you are part of this community? You know, if I am an Adventist, I must be a blessing to my neighbors, to everyone. A blessing, a real blessing. I don't know if you remember when I was working as a division president for the General Conference session, I brought once in my report, or in our division report, a handicapped lady. That is a real missionary that brought many people to Christ. She is my age, but she is probably this size and with all bones broken and so on. But I just visited them several weeks ago. And it is amazing to discover how the national TV and journalists are surrounding her and inviting her to reports and everything, because being in such a situation, she is such a blessing to people who are hurting. And she has improved lives of so many people. And Adventism is written now with big letters. Now they have opened our churches that were sealed for more than 15 years. Because the life of Adventist lady, handicapped lady, was a sermon, was a preaching, you know. It was a. So I think this is something we have to think. If our message only reaches the brain and doesn't go further, something is wrong. Now, the emerging church makes a strong emphasis on the social gospel. Well, you all know the pluses and minuses of this. I'm not going into it, but I would like to say that in many countries, and especially in Europe, through social acts, we can open more doors than in any other way. just speaking about one church in Asia, in the Muslim country. The pastor told me that the church is surrounded by high-rise buildings. And they always had a problem, the government, to give out pension to the retirees, because they did not use that way that in Europe and America is mostly the only way to do it through bank accounts. They would just give it to people. And they had a hard time to find a place where to. And our pastor, being a very creative, he saw that there's many retirees were living in this high-rising building. He said and suggested to the government, why not you would come to our churches, it's safe, and during the week give out retirement to the people. The government was so rejoicing and jumped for this idea, and now you come to the church during the week, there is a government official there, and elderly people coming to receive their pension. But not only now they're coming to receive their pension, they're coming now on Sabbath and giving part of their pension to the church. Why? Because the guy had an idea how to serve the community. Then he saw there were a number of handicapped children. So why not to develop a program for handicapped people? 3 weeks ago we had a baptism. I just came for the final part of it, and we baptized 8 people, and most of them Muslims, former Muslims. Why? It was the social acts of the people. Because people felt they needed, and another guy, a Muslim also, has discovered that there's so many ladies and they have so many kids. And they have challenged, to wash all the clothes. So they bought a lot of washing machines in their home and invited them, come wash your clothes here and dry them here for free. And now he has a lot of comers that are coming, are interested. What motivates you to do it and so on. I think there is a lesson we can learn for our church today. Now, when you look at the emerging churches, they not only do it, but they also advertise and write about this, that the postmodern mind is open only to the narrative preaching. And I ask myself, we can do it also. There is nothing wrong about narrative preaching. Has it wondered you that in the Bible you will never find a chapter on one doctrine, another chapter on another doctrine, If I would write the Bible, I would write this way. First on creation, then on... But the Bible is not written this way. And Jesus, in his ministry and his teaching, was doing only through, mostly, stories and parables, don't you think so? Why he did it? Why can't we do the same? And I have a dream to develop a series, evangelistic series, that would present all of our fundamental beliefs, but not through text here and there, but through narratives. You take a passage and show. Take a passage and show. We have not done a good job yet, but it is possible. I think we have to learn from it. Why not? Of course, we have to always keep in mind that we have different groups or different cultures in our churches or in the society always. So the old way also works, but not for all. But if we want to reach the postmodern, we have to look and see what we can do here. Now, worship style is another issue. And I ask myself, can we take some lessons? Well, definitely not all what the emerging churches are practicing is acceptable. But I think we have to think about the worship style we do, the hymns we sing. For me, the greatest example of the need to adjust to the cultures in our worship style is India and Brazil. If you go to India and speak to the pastors, they will tell you a story that for many, many decades, the church was not growing, really. Mostly who were converted were immigrants. And you ask why? and they will tell you that the missionaries who brought the message, they brought not only the message, they brought the American culture. And they brought the songs that were acceptable in United States. But these songs are not touching Indian heart. They have totally different rhythms. And some pastors wanted to introduce the Indian style of singing, and they were rejected. And it is only when finally they have introduced, songs and written their own songs that would really fit to their rhythm and style that the church started to grow. And now it's growing. The same happened in Brazil. When you go in Brazil and see the worship, it is alive. The songs they are singing, it's not what the Americans are singing in North America. They sing songs that really adequate to their mentality, to their all, being. Of course, for Europeans, it might be too strong. But when you look, I think it's a great example. And one of the success of the church in Brazil is that they have not rejected their culture. They have taken the message. They have not changed the message. Please understand me correctly. The biblical truth is a biblical truth. It is the eternal truth. But the way we present the truth need to fit the culture. Otherwise, the truth will never be accepted. So worship style, we have to think. And since for young people, for the postmodern mind, actions, ceremonies are very important, why not to introduce things that would really respond to it? For example, in Russia, what works, without any without any problems, when you do evangelism, almost all evangelists now have learned it, and they ask people, if you want us to pray for your needs, put your request in the box, and then they make a special ceremony. When there is a finishing of the presentation, the special plate is brought in a very nice way, and then a number of people surround it and they pray about it, and it works. It works for this culture. I don't know here, but we have to find these elements. Why not to put these elements and do it in the way that would really appeal, that would speak to the hearts of the people? So we need to think about this. Now we have actually done a study on some churches where young people, the postmodern-minded people, are attending the churches. Because we felt that they don't like sermons, something else must attract them. This was our presupposition. And we have interviewed a number of young people, and we were so amazed when we heard their reports. No one referred to, let's say, music or something else as number one reason. Everyone we interviewed, young people, told us it was a sermon. And so then we started to look at the sermon that was preached in this congregation. And we discovered it was always a biblical message. The Bible was not used, just as a spring kind of bread to start out. But no, it was based on a passage with applications that would really be help to young people during the week. So it was really, and we were surprised that young people, postmodern people, for them it is important. So we have to rethink how we do things. Sorry for preaching, because you could preach me the same. But since you gave me the opportunity, why not? Now, the young people and the emerging church tries to respond to it. There is a diminishing the significance of an organized church, and usually the people are anti-structure oriented people. Now, this is a fact. Young people, the postmodern people, they are against structure. You know, if Rafat would introduce himself to young people and say, I'm the division president, just by saying it, he lost their attention. That's it. Because they're anti-structure. You already bad only because you're a leader of the structure. So what to do? You know, we cannot survive without the structure, but I think we can learn a lesson. We have to do everything possible to make the structure to serve the needs of the people. And if they feel that they have a benefit from the structure, that the structure serves them, they will, if not accept it wholeheartedly, they will tolerate it. I think it is a great responsibility of us leaders, what we do and how we do things. You know, today, if you just introduce your structure as a burden or troublemaker, it will just add more fuel to the fire. We have to find a way to make it attractive. And there are ways. We can do it. But unfortunately, we have not done it yet. When you speak to pastors, very often pastors tell you they have the feeling that they serve the structure and not the structure serves them. We have to rethink. We have to do something. Finally, we have to find ways so that pastors would feel the structure is needed. It helps me. And church members need to feel it. So we need to find ways. This is why, for example, many church organizations today, they make special days when they invite medical professionals and serve the community, serve the church members, and so on and so forth. But we need to find ways to show that we serve them. It is a must today. If not, no one will be interested in organization. So I think this is a spirit of the time. And one more thing, I spoke about preaching. You know, since the word and the hermeneutics is totally different for postmoderns, and they accept not what really the author wanted to say, they accept only what works for them, we have to be careful after presenting a careful exegesis that the modern part will accept very, joyfully. We must make an application and show how it is a blessing and a benefit to them. And if they feel it is a benefit to me, then they feel, oh, it has spoken to me. Oh, then this is the word of God. I think it's not to reject our understanding of Scripture. It is how we present it in such a way so that it would be acceptable. Sorry, I'm going back and forth. Now, social media. Social media, and I will finish by that. There are many, many things you could speak when you speak about the emerging church, and you can read a lot. There is a lot of written, a lot critique, whatever you can find. But I think there are some lessons we can learn. When it comes to the social media, many emerging churches use it masterfully. They provide food for the brain daily through the social media. And very often they have large following. You will never see them in a big multi-church building or mega church, but they are somewhere, in the web. But they are following. And I think we have to learn from it. We have to do something. If the young people today in the social media, if we want to reach them, we better go to them where they are. And we do something for them. For example, if you take young children, preschool children, almost every family that has a youngster tells you the child does not eat breakfast, does not eat lunch, does not eat dinner without putting in front of him a screen with some interesting children programs. But try to find Adventist games or programs for this kind of children. We have almost nothing. Why we don't do it? We have to do it. Since the children are there, we have to go there. We have to rethink how we use social media. We have to develop. You know, we are accustomed to preach 50 minutes. But in social media, the postmodern mind is open only 3 minutes. And this is already too much. So we have to find ways. And we have now, praise be to the Lord, a young group of people who are trying to develop films 1.5, 2 minutes long to present the beauty of Adventism. We have to do it. We have to find people where they are, social media. I think I will finish here and I will leave you with a question. What approach to culture should we follow in the 21st century Europe? Christ against culture, Christ of culture, Christ above culture, or Christ transforming culture?
Thank you, Artur, for excellent presentation. We are humbly trying to use something that emerging churches are using in work with young people. Let's say more focus on spirituality, action, social justice, many other things that you mentioned. But sometimes we hear from structures that message against emerging spirituality, message against emerging churches using their methods. And this message comes back to us as opposition of some, I would say extreme groups. Look what you are doing. Even GC is saying, don't use these methods. I think it's enough just to mention how to help us. That we are not trying to bring mystical spirituality or liberalism. We are trying to use methods.
Don't use it. Now, what I mean is the following. You see, some words and expressions have meanings, and they are loaded with meanings. And so when you use the word emerging church, for example, it all depends what kind of information a person has about the emerging church. And there are a lot of things that are really negative that the emerging church is doing, and you would never follow it. You know, but when you use that you follow, you know, the emerging church, then people take the negative baggage. And so I think we have to be very wise to communicate correctly. And so what we are saying is I have never told you today that we have to go away from doctrines. I said we have to present them in such a way that Christ would be the center. All would agree, I mean, in the Adventist church. But if you use the word emerging, immediately you raise flags in the brains of our people. And so we are not following the emerging church. We are looking what they are doing. We see some things that they bring to extremes. We see some things are working for them. And we, you know, work and try to take what is positive work for us, but don't call it emerging, because you will lose right away a significant percentage of people in your church and also among young people as well, because a number of young people are still living the modernity period. So it really depends. So I would say, be wise how you communicate. And also what is very important, you know, when we want to attract people, we sometimes walk, so to speak, on the edge of the knife, you know, to be attractive. And sometimes we use expressions that we feel would really give us credits by young people. But while we are getting credit by young people, we lose all the credits by the old people. So we have to be very wise how we communicate. So, for example, if you would come to the church and say, we have to involve the youth, you know, in serving the needs of our society, no one will say something. You say, we have to follow the emerging church and take parts of the social gospel, everyone will be against you. As I think it is very important for us to be very wise what we do, and also be grounded. For example, I love the Seventh-day Adventist message. I love the Seventh-day Adventist church. And I know how treasureful all of it is. But I also know, if I want this treasure to, bring to the postmodern mind, I have to change vehicles, how I bring it to them. And so, be wise, find words that are acceptable and that will be, so be careful what you say. Because just pronouncing sometimes one expression would send people away from you and they will never come to you.
Thank you for your presentation. I have lived some years in America, and I have lived most of my life in Europe, in Norway. And I just wonder, because in the US I have friends. I have a good friend who teaches at Andrews University who is very exercised over what he calls the Emergent Church. And I have never seen much of it, even in America. I have heard a lot of discussion about it, but I have not really seen much of it. In Europe, I haven't seen it at all. I just don't know, maybe I haven't paid attention. What I have seen in Europe are other big movements that have nothing to do with church. And just to play off, rhetorically off our nice devotional this morning about the Good Samaritan and falling among robbers. Almost 20 years ago, the population of Iraq fell among robbers. And the robbers were Western countries attacking a country in the Middle East. And then the population of Syria fell among robbers, and there were millions and millions of refugees in need of Good Samaritans. And there were some Good Samaritans, but they were not Christians. The churches, the religious world, the American religious world, the European religious world were quite hostile to these people who needed badly a Good Samaritan. And the other movement that is also afoot in the world is an ecological sensitization, an awareness of the pain and the groaning of creation. And the people who are part of that movement are also not church. There's no emergent church there either, but there are big movements. And if we engage with these people, the issue is not, are you going to stop eating pork? I would like you to eat pork. Because the person you talk to, he is already a vegan, and he wonders if you want to become one too. So I think we need to sort of reconceptualize movements, what is what here, and talk about the real things, such as refugees in need of help. Are we going to engage? Secular people, Good Samaritans, are engaging them. Are we going to be part of a kind of environmental rescue operation that also includes some of the dietary things that we have believed once in a while, though not much in the part of the world that is most critical of what we wish to do in this part of the world. So I just wonder if, in some ways, here we are talking about ships passing each other in the night and not exactly hitting the real hot spots of what is happening in Europe.
Well, as you answered yourself the question, we have to be aware what is happening around us and be a church that is needed, the church that will bring blessings to the society. Only then they will really come to us. So this is the key. We have to serve, look around us, and no one can prescribe. What we really need is to have open eyes, to see, look, and get involved. Now, concerning the refugees, when you look at what is happening in MENA, they have developed some programs in Lebanon that are quite successful. But the big question is how to involve everyone. We have here and there such good examples, but how to involve everyone? Everyone to get involved, and if we have, let's say, over 20 million, everyone would be, someone to witness. It would be a big blessing. For example, when you speak about North America, the question of the health issues are very important. And we could really present Adventism in a very, very, very positive way. And now it was not long ago, a new film was produced, about the wholeness in lifestyle. And for me, it was tragic to see that all kinds of universities were presented, and they did not mention Loma Linda. You know, that is a flagship university to proclaim our health. And I ask myself, what is wrong? Why we are not really serving the society? Although I know Loma Linda does a lot. For example, now serving in the neighborhood communities and creating a college community and so on and so forth. But we do much less than we could. You know, for healthy lifestyle, that is needed in Europe also. We could be portrayed and make our image as those who do it. Because we need to be portrayed in ways that the society will feel, oh, we need them. They are good for us.